Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Quixotic topic. As always, I'm your host, and today I'm joined by.
Kai. Hello, I'm Kai. I go by they, them. I am 19. I go to App State, Boone, North Carolina. Go Mountaineers. I am pretty well round. I'm artist. I go for graphic design, so a lot of my art is very digital. But yeah, I'm very intuitive about my culture and things like that, and I think that's pretty cool. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for having me. And so today's topic, as Kai has explained, is going to be the alt community, and specifically people of color in the alt community. And so, starting at the start, I think what would be best is kind of definitions, so we're on the same page on what the alternative or alt community actually is.
So with the alt community, like I can't really give you such a big broad thing, but like I know for me, like the alt community is just not fitting into that mainstream and pop culture ideals. A lot of your ideals are very above what you're taught in school. A lot of these things aren't things that you learn in school. You use the internet, you use your friends, you make connections. And I think a lot of people think of the alt community as just a bunch of nerds or weirdos that aren't necessarily like a part of the normal culture of like per se the things you'll see like on the news or something like that. It's not mainstream at all. So I think with those things, the alt community is definitely a bigger thing that people think it is because it's broke down into a lot of different subgenres. Like you can go on and on about it. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that's pretty analogous to what my understanding of the alt community is. It's kind of a pot of whatever mainstream society kind of deems maybe not unsavory, but just that doesn't fit into the norm, right?
Right.
Like instead of wearing like a ankle length pleated skirt, having like a short skirt, for example, that would be different. And the alt community is something that kind of has existed for a very long time now, since like before the 70s even,
Yeah.
uh, and is something that has existed globally and takes a lot of different forms in different cultures. And so one thing that I would like to ask you, Kai, is what are some of your favorite aspects about the alternative community?
Well, for me, music and art is very big to me. And with the alt community, even back when alt became such a big thing here in America, it started in New York. That's where kind of the big punk mentality started. And music and art was ways to, put yourself out there and to show that like you don't stand for these things and these peoples and capitalism, things like that. And I think that's like expression is really good. And I think fashion is a big part of that also, which I'm very into fashion. I've gotten more into it as time has begun and things like that, and I've learned to like be able to buy things that aren't very fast fashion, but I'm able to DIY things myself, things like that, that shows that I'm just not a mainstream person that like goes and shops at like, what's the mainstream store? Forever 21 or something.
Right,
Like
so 21, like Aeropostale,
yeah.
H&M,
Like a
kind
lot
of.
of people don't understand that the alternative community, like fashion is a big part of it. As much as like the ideologies and things like that, fashion is very big because you're able to show like making a patch like or something or creating a jean jacket or something like that. I think is really cool that you're able to be your own self through your fashion or through your art or through your music. That's kind of where the alt community started.
Right. I think that specifically kind of talking about New York, um now I can't say specifically on the chronology if it happened at the same time, but comparable to the Harlem Renaissance, the alt community had kind of became the like physical embodiment of self-identity and like being able to be who you are by yourself. And there's a lot of interesting like comparisons between the Harlem Renaissance and the alt community and the, I guess, rise of the alt community and its alignment with progressivist ideals. For example, while the Harlem Renaissance was kind of treated as a sense of togetherness in a sense where everyone was kind of coming together to create works of art, whether that be pottery, poetry, or various genres and some genres of music. The alt community was kind of everyone coming together to be themselves, if I
Right.
have that correct.
Right.
Right. Personally, I have, I guess, not a lot of stints with the alt community that isn't kind of the most objectively mainstream things. Like I've always heard things like the main flag bearers like Willow Smith and Rico Nasty, Doja Cat, stuff like that. But and I think that kind of explains how my connection to it is mainly with music. I personally am into a lot of, I guess, alternative artists that create music in terms of like you have Machine Girl, Wolf Girl, Ash Nico, I think. Does that? I'm pretty sure that counts. I do like some of Doja Cat songs, a couple less of Rico Nasty's, but still kind of in terms of my proximity to the alt community, it's mainly through the musical sense. And I haven't actually considered it in the fashion sense, but that makes a lot of sense. I've said it 3 times now. Um, by itself, right? Because like, what is a better way to express yourself than the clothes that you wear,
Right.
right? And so, kind of, could you explain what exactly fast fashion is?
So with fast fashion, we already know like here in our like I guess our country, we already have things like people I like I'm trying to think of some states. Yeah, like California, they have a very big fast fashion thing in terms of like people working for like 30 cents an hour or something like that, making these quick things. Happens in places like China. That's where a lot of Shein things come from. A lot of like other big consumers that a lot of these men and women and other peoples wear in terms of like things like that. Fast fashion is something that's cheap. You
Mhm.
can like get a t-shirt on Shein for like $2.
Right.
You can get these cheap rings for 50 cents. And
Mhm.
and it's the quality isn't there, you know. And
Right.
when you put it in terms of like real vintage pieces that you find and you're able to fix up yourself, I think that's really cool. And like I don't shame people for using fast fashion. I use it sometimes. And it's like a lot of people think of it as a way to shame people, which I see a lot on TikTok. Like they're like, oh, if you do fast fashion, you're this. I was like, a lot of plus size people use that because it's hard to find their sizes on these very cool vintage archives of clothes, or even the thrift store is hard to find like
Right.
regular clothes for like people who aren't the European standards for bodies. So, I
Okay.
don't shame people for fast fashion. I don't. It's just the fact that being able to express yourself and having kind of everyone look the same isn't really the best. Like you don't want to have to profit giving money to these people who are suffering and making these children. It's children that's out here making these clothes and things like that. So we gotta, be mindful where we use our money.
Right. And
So
then there's also kind of the environmental concerns that fast fashion provides, right? Because if so many people are using so much denim to make the same pair of shorts over and over and over again, like eventually, like specifically talking about denim, I think like the dyeing process is very like messy and creates a lot of overall pollution that kind of has to sit into the general atmosphere, and so that creates kind of more pressure against people to use to not use fast fashion. But of course, that would mean that we would have to start thinking about alternatives that could service a wider range and diversity of people in a way that is constructive and not destructive, right?
right.
Um, and so I also, well, you brought up an interesting point about TikTok. I would, well, I have my own personal reservations about TikTok as an app, but that's a story for another Tuesday. Um, one thing that I have to admit, TikTok is amazing in its ability for exposure of creators of all sizes, right? Um, I believe something similar to this happened on Vine. And so, seeing as that you know a little bit more about this than I do, could you talk to me about how the alt community exists on TikTok?
Yeah. it's very big there, you know, like um they drive a lot of the trends that we see. They brought back a lot of trends. Like, you know, this Y2K McBling thing has been like a big thing. Like a lot of people also don't know that like that's an alternative subgenre. Being Y2K is a total subgenre. Anything that's not mainstream or popular is an alternative subgenre. Like there's so many, like, you know, with the e-girl culture that came from Harajuku, which is a subgenre. So it's like having TikTok like kind of driving these trends that we see every day is big. And with the alt community, you know, it has its negs. Like I say for sure, like I see a lot of POC who are treated terrible for being
Mhm.
alternative, you know?
Right,
Like
right.
it's sad because people in their comments are like, oh, you're Asian fishing. Like what? Like it's things
And
like that that's kind of just like you guys are co-opting from black terms and black movements, like black fishing. Like that's a real thing. You see a lot of these creators like Nikita Dragon. She's a beautiful, beautiful person, but she uses dark skin as something that's weird because she was never like that. She's an Asian woman. And then there's a lot of these other white women that you see who you're just like you thought like you would think like, oh, that's a black girl, that's a light skinned girl. No, she's white. What? And
Mhm.
it's like with
And so
that,
it's
it's
kind of
like we're not giving it credit, you know?
like a neo digital blackface then.
Yeah, like it's weird, like because we like, for example, there was this thing that came around recently, I think in the past month, that a girl um she uses apps to make her skin look darker, but when people say I know her in person, she is not that dark.
Oh,
Like it's crazy. And when you put these personas that people, a lot of people have personas on TikTok, like, you know, whatever subgenre you are in, like you definitely can tell these people who are posers in a way, and they just want to be like this because they see it on TikTok. And that's like something that I really think is problematic because a lot of these subgenres came from POC and black people. Um,
right.
like I said earlier with the e-girl and the Harajuku thing, those things are tell and tell, and that's where the Asian, you know, people who are white girls mainly who are trying to look Asian and profit off Asian culture because they
Right.
dress or act like that subculture. And that's not saying that, you know, you can't dress that way, but realize what you're doing,
Credit where
you
credit's
know?
due.
Yeah, or like I'm trying to think of another one. Let's see. Like, okay, so let's talk about what's another subgenre. So like the Y2K, for example.
Y2K movement. Of course.
Definitely a lot of black people who drove that. Like you see people like Destiny Child, you see people like Missy Elliott. They drove that Y2K. And moving on, people don't understand that Y2K wasn't just that cute like tracksuit. It came from a lot of cyber, very Y2K, and the Y2K virus that came out in the 90s. That was about the world ending because they thought the world was going to end. It was going to crash
Mhm.
because they didn't know how to program the computers to turn into 2000 in a new
Right.
millennium. So
Exactly.
when
Of course.
people really,
Y2K meaning the year 2000.
yeah,
Um,
a lot of people don't
that
realize the real Y2K
movement being,
movement came from the 1995.
mhm,
So
yeah.
yeah,
And so, you touch on a very interesting point about kind of the alternative community and the fact that it is everything that isn't mainstream and how it can negatively warp perceptions on various races, that being Black and Asian, you specifically commented on. And so, I kind of want to talk about the dichotomy between kind of what how it is to be inside of the alt community, and how you kind of face exclusions from both sides, right? From other people that I've talked to about this subject, other people of color in the alt community, that being, they mainly talked about the concept of being too white to be black and too black to be white.
yeah,
Um, and so it seems that a lot of people of color are kind of stuck in this like purgatory of cultural interest,
yeah,
um, because, and this is because, per my research at least, the alt community has mainly been defined as very anti-black,
mm,
in the sense that like you can't be black and into this kind of music. You
Right.
can't be black and dressed a certain way. Um, and so I think one thing that, and this reaches back to my point about TikTok, is it serves as a kind of cultural device that helps us change these norms. And the in a weird way, the alt community becoming more and more mainstream has helped to kind of destigmatize and undo the stereotypes that being in the alt community automatically makes you a race trader.
Yeah, it's just really weird, because as someone who's okay, let me just explain this part. So when you talked about like being too white to do this and being too black to do this, I know a lot of POC and black people who used to be that way in middle school and then they changed in high school because they didn't want to be perceived. But like once they got out of high school, it came back. Like I know for me, I was very into a lot of things that were emo back in middle school or whatever that was. So I listened to a lot of like nightcore, dubstep, things like that. Plus having like black girl brides and things. Those were two different subgenres together. And I was also into a lot of K-pop and things like that too, which I still am. But when I got to high school and like when I moved a lot as a kid, so that also was really hard to kind of keep up my persona, I guess. And so with that, it was really hard to like keep up with the other kids. You can tell they can bully you, and things like that. So I like kind of hid that part of me because I was so afraid that I was gonna be perceived as white when I'm not. I'm black. I just like things that aren't mainstream.
Right.
Like I don't
Exactly.
like, I didn't listen to a lot of rap music when I was younger, but now I do. But I like kind of had I felt the need to force myself to. Like I sit there and try to listen to NBA YoungBoy. I'm like I can't, and it's weird. It's really weird because I'm just like
Yeah.
I can't be like how everyone wants the normal black person to be
Right.
because
And of course, like the concept of a normal black person has like its racist roots, right? A la Booker T. Washington, trying to be as normal, puritanical, and evangelical as you can be, such that when other people see you, they don't see something that is negative; they just see something that is a person, right? There's a lot of kind of, and a lot of things stem from this. Respectability politics, for example, a lot of that kind of comes from um, black people being forced to act a certain way such that they can be seen a certain way. And in this current day and age, gratefully, that's not incredibly necessary, or at least it's not as prevalent as it was before. And so now we kind of have a lot of like a generational difference of people who were kind of grown up in this you have to fit this mold society, or because your choices were fit the mold or death.
yeah,
And now it's you don't immediately or like you aren't incredibly disadvantaged by not fitting the mold. In fact, now we're starting to question like, well, why is there a mold in the first place? Which starts to get into kind of conversations about the construction of race, but again, a story for a different Tuesday.
yeah,
And so I kind of want to talk a little bit more about the exclusion of people of color in the alt community. And another kind of bit of irony about it, and how a lot of kind of the things that created the alt community, like rock and roll, for example, or and its derivatives such as metal, came from people of color, and how that has been, I, I guess you could say, like taken from them and warped in a sense where, okay, well now if you're into things like rock and roll and metal, then goes back to what I was talking about being anti-black.
hmm yeah. You know, with that always kind of like just today I was just talking about that on my account with my friends, and you know when you are a part of something, you wouldn't want it to be something that doesn't match your beliefs. And like when kind of like the subgenres came around and became a thing, being a black, like being POC, being black was, dude, those were the pinpointers. They did these things, and they wanted these things to be uh, ideas about being anti-sexism, anti-racist, things like that. They didn't want it to be a competition to see who's better than anyone else. And when white people came and whitewashed it and in a way made it to white containment, like if they made it in a way that's easier for white people to get into, like it's like, you know, it comes with a lot of music artists too, you know, like for example, I can name a few: Tyler the Creator, Frank Ocean, Kevin Abstract. They are black men. They are black men of the LGBT community who are alternative, and their music is for white consumption. Like they make music for white people. It's true. Like you see a lot of their intro into the black community. And so being in the alt community, like say for example, baby metal, they were a subgenre of an original big old girl group, which was mainly pop music. But using metal, they perceived a whole different community of POC men and white men who liked metal music. So you see like three Japanese girls dancing on stage, you see a bunch of men in the audience. Like it's something that you don't see. You know, like it's you know, it comes with a lot of these different music genres. Like they're opening a gate to a new community, a new target audience to help them perceive their group better. Like the original group that baby metal derived from was a pop group. So going from pop to metal was a big thing, and a lot of people didn't like that, but a lot of Americans really liked that. Right. You know, like K-pop came from black people, and Lee Suman, he owns SMS Entertainment. He even, when he was an artist back in the 80s and the 90s, he even said that he copied black artists. Like K-pop is just Korean pop. Like it's not like just derived from Asian culture. It came from a different culture, and they made it so Koreans could containment. So when it comes to being an alt person, you don't realize that if being a white person in those things, you don't realize where that real history came from. You think white people make this thing because it's the majority of white people in that community, but they seem as the face of that community because there's so many white people who's in that community, but they don't forget there's some black people in that shield behind them.
Right. And so kind of more overarching kind of one thing that you said about the alt community, which is important to remember, is that it kind of and this is something that we've been touching on. It somewhat transcends a lot of racial barriers, right? Like kind of K-pop having derivations from black people and or black influence rather, and how a lot of metal music has a lot of black influence, and that's not to say that like black people are like the supreme proprietors of the entirety of pop culture ever. Like I'm not too high on my horse to say that black people created everything, right?
Right. Like we know for sure some things are made by white people, or made by Asian people, or made by Hispanic people. Like we know where we don't do. Like
it's just that
just the fact that like black
by way of proximity, a lot of the things that are popular today have a lot of roots from black influence, and so it's weird on a lot of sides, right? Because there's also a lot of kind of metal bands that are like that are notorious for being very like pro-white and white pride, white supremacy, and whatnot. And so it's kind of weird to see the Ouroboros go all the way around, where we've gone from a very inclusive, by way of existence, community being turned into something that is where borders are always drawn all the time, and lines are marked in the sand at any chance you can get. And it would seem to me that the alt community has kind of been made this way by people who aren't in the alt community, or at least aren't implicitly in the alt community. Because, and this is something that has kind of dawned on me while we were talking about, is kind of the reason that the alt community exists and always has existed is because there has always been a like mainstream, like there's always something that is mainly popular. And so I think that a lot of these problems arise when the alt community went mainstream, which is kind of odd because, like, by the definitions that we've set, can't happen, right? Like, the alt community is specifically things that aren't mainstream, and which gets into another line that's drawn, right? Because, like, at what point can you truly fully be alt? Like, let's say there's people live in houses if they can afford it. Um, Again, story for another Tuesday. Um, but would that mean that living kind of by yourself on a mountain and completely 100% self-sufficient is that part of the alt community?
Right. Like,
Right.
is that kind of like if you have a bunch of houses in a row and you have that one house that's above everyone else, then are you all? Like, that's kind of what it said.
Right, exactly. Like, I remember, I can give a specific anecdote. My parents had wanted to paint our drain pipes, like on the side of the house. We wanted to paint them black because we thought it looked cooler, and we painted the garage black. And we got a letter from the HOA. It was like, "Don't do that." And reasons for why we should be allowed to do that aside, um, it kind of goes all the way back to kind of the carnal human desire to fit in. And it would seem to me that the alt community kind of respectfully spits in the face of that and is like fitting in, or I guess the truest way to fit in is to not fit in, for sake of being philosophical.
Right. Yeah, with that, it's like when you go back to its roots, and like a lot of it being alt came from many things, but I think what really sparked out true alt movement was being punk. And being punk came from being in the 70s. England, New York were the top two places that punk derives from. And being punk, as I said a million times, anti-racism, anti-sexism, and a lot of their bigger movements and bigger beliefs were anti-capitalist, anti-leftist. And not anti-leftist, but leftists. They weren't democratic. They weren't all right. They weren't none of these things. They weren't far right. They weren't conservative. They weren't authoritarian. They were left. They wanted better for a lot of these communities. They rooted for people who are black. They rooted for people who are Hispanic. They rooted for poor people. They rooted for women. Like, and with that, it's like they have so many other things that came from it, like and aren't anarchism and things like that. And a lot of people associate being violent with being punk and being anarchy and all of that. But anarchism comes in many, many different subgenres by itself. That's
Right.
another thing for another Tuesday. So, with that, it's just like people understand that all community wasn't just a persona. It was something that people wanted to put a voice to. Like the alt community is LGBT. The alt community has a lot of black and people of color. A lot of people don't understand that. Like a lot of people didn't want it to be a facade. It wasn't supposed to be like this. And I think that's kind of why fashion became a bigger thing with it also. Like if you don't dress this way, you're not all. You can listen to the music and have the ideologies but look like a basic bin and still be alternative because you have those ideologies. And that's like, I don't know if you ever saw my one story the other day. I was really mad, but I posted about how you cannot be a Trump supporter, you cannot be conservative and be punk. That like hits each other, contradicts each other. And it's like, it sucks that a lot of people think, oh, well, I can support Trump and be a Trump supporter and still listen to Sex Pistols, or still listen to Bad Brain, or still listen to all these other groups and still be good. No.
Right. And that's because, like, those bands that created, and the music that they created was like very staunchly oppressed, or rather staunchly opposed, I misspoke, to a lot of the policies that Trump and other conservative presidents support. And so it kind of it leads into kind of like why do you consume like the media that you consume, right? Like, are you listening to this because it sounds good, or are you listening to this because you're empathizing with what the lyrics are saying and deeper metaphors that the artist had written into them,
Right.
right? Um, I want to go back to kind of the TikTok dilemma, in a sense, and talk about how we've kind of covered how the alt community opens a lot of gates, right? Like, it's supposed to be kind of, I guess, a home for the lost in a sense, in the way that you don't have to. There's not like a form that you have to fill out in order to like participate in. It's more just kind of a vibe,
Right.
to put it simply. But one thing that I have seen on TikTok is a lot of gatekeeping,
Mm, yes.
about who can and cannot join the alt community. And I know this kind of stands a bit opposed to what you literally just said, but I kind of wanted to meditate on that, right? Because if, in the sense that, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier, if the alt community like fully, I guess, aligns itself to the mainstream, right, and becomes like the most popular, domineering thing, then by way of definition, the things that aren't um, popular would become the new alt, right? If you think about it in a mathematical sense, uh, it's kind of like a sine wave of what is mainstream and what is alt. Is a sine and cosine, right? Like they're always in flux with each other. And so, in the event that some of the more left-leaning policies and ideologies um, in the alt community become dominant, then I guess my question to you is: would that mean that the more right-leaning policies and ideologies, and like those people who do support Trump, um, would they become the new alt community, right? Like, and it's weird. Going back to me calling it a home for the lost, is a home for the lost. What it isn't really like a house as much as it's like a very very large field,
Right.
right? And so, and that is kind of like my biggest curiosity about the alt community, right? Is like how it's interesting to see so many people policing and saying like what can and cannot be, when it ideally, I guess, from what we have set up, should always be changing.
Right. With that, it's like you have to think of kind of like how change happens in this world. Like, for example, I took fashion merchandising back in high school, and we talked about the fashion cycle and how every 20 years something leaves and goes to trend and it comes back. But now time has been going a lot faster. So it went from 20 to 10 years this quick. Like, we're already seeing trends from 2010 being re-brought up. Like, from the difference between like a skater skirt and a tennis skirt. There's a complete difference. But the skater skirt is more of the 2021 version, while the skater skirt's the 2010, and then the tennis skirt would be the 2021 version. So it's like it's a cycle that comes and goes. So like it'll be things replacing itself, but also come back, but in a new refined way. So I think that's really cool of the alternative community to do that. That we're able to not like we have certain things pop up more than usual, but then it'll regress back and they come back in a different form. You know,
Right.
like it's weird in a sense to say that like you could be, for example, you could be very emo, but into very scene music, things like that. But then you come back 10 years later listening to like something like glitchcore. So it's like you have sigilcore, things like this, these new types of music that incorporates rap and like nightcore into one thing. And it's crazy. Like it blows my mind. Like I started listening to that one guy that's been going all over TikTok. And it's like it's rap music and trap mixed with like nightcore and things like that, which is nightcore and a lot of that. This returns to like scene music and dubstep, EDM, and things like that. And I think that's really freaking cool that you see
Right.
it come back in a new form package with a bow on top. So I think like being able to see changes like that is cool, but I also think it could also become negative. Like you said, we like being left could become the new mainstream, and then being far right conservative is the new alternative. So
Right.
like that's kind of scary to
Yes.
think about.
Like, I think there's a movement going on right now, quite specifically called the alt right. um, and so I talking about kind of all the idiosyncrasies that the alt community contains can be a lot very confusing. And so, as a self-proclaimed member of the alt community yourself, what could you kind of provide to newcomers or people who are merely observing, kind of tips of or like points of interest or maybe even recommendations?
So with that, I'd say explore. Like honestly, being alternative is just the blanket. Like I said, there is multiple and multiple subgenres. Like I could go on for days. There's like things like same with music, how there's like, you have heavy metal, death metal, like all these things, and then you go around and have like indie music, and you have like midwestern indie bands, and like they're all different sounds. Same with rap music. They have music from Atlanta, music from New York, music from Cali. Like there's so many different things. And I'd say if you ever want to like be like a lot of mainstream things, it's like pop music. So it's like if you want to change that mainstream that you listen to, try starting with one genre and then move down in that genre, you know? Like so say if you listen to pop music, so say if your favorite artist is like let's start with rap. So say if your favorite rap artist female, City Girls, for example. You have City Girls up here, very trap oriented. How about trying Rico Nasty? And then going from there, you have Nasty Nuna. She's a Korean like music. She Korean punky music. Like she's kind of similar to Rico Nasty in that way also. So like kind of just trying to find a way where you fit in, and then from there you can just explore. Like I can tell you right now, my like playlists, it's like it go from listening to, let's think of artists like Megan Thee Stallion to like freaking baby metal or the K-pop, or it goes back to something like Daft Punk or things like that. Or Sophia, she passed away sadly, but she was very into a lot of like alternative music that we listen to now, like Charlie XCX, people like that. Like they're all like different ways, and it's the same thing with alternative music from back then. Like they have Dreamwave and all of that. So it's like you just have to find where you think your music listens to, or like say it's same thing for going from being into rock music to pop music. Like if you started with like Kiss, you can go down to like a different band like Mumford and Sons. They're more like folk rock and things like that. Just work yourself away from where you start and then continue. Exploring is okay. A lot of people don't understand that. That's why alternative is so many subgenres, because you could explore, you can be whoever you want to be. You can even have your own subgenre in a way. Like I know, like for me, a lot of my fashion is very streetwear based, but I throw a lot of punk and gothic aspects in it because that's how I like it. So it comes out that way. Like wearing headbands like this was a very 90s, very streetwear style thing, but then I pair it with a chain. Like it's just like mom's like that. That's something I'd wear back then. I'm like, so,
Right, right, right. And so
but
it's
also at the same time with that, be careful about where you go, because you don't want to change yourself necessarily, but you want to bring out the self that you always had. So like never if you don't like try to have a persona like, and then you go home and you're like some
completely
fake
different.
conservative, yeah, or something like that. Like I see a lot of that on TikTok. Like people get exposed for having a double life. Like this ain't Freaky Friday, I can tell you that much. So it's like
So it's not and I again a bit ironic. It's not like something that you can just like put on, right? It's
yeah.
not all community isn't just like a jacket that you can wear and take off as much as it is um and kind of I'm not entirely sure how to finish this in the same scope of fashion.
Right. Like
But
it's not something you would put on like So, like, for example, the Doc Martin, that is a very prominent shoe. Demonias, those are very prominent shoes in the alt community. It's not like you put them on, you take them off and put on some Sperry's. Like, that's just like, how does that work? Or like you
Right.
put on some Axes from Walmart. Like, that's not how it works. Fashion, just wearing something does not make you alt. What makes you alt is how you think.
It's the way you think. So it's not as much a cultural movement ambition as it is a cultural mindset.
Right.
Is
Like
in a
you
way.
know your brain and learning these things, like being able to be an activist and for socialist and political movements is big when you become an alternative person. Like, that could become a whole different conversation when it talks about how fake progressivism. That's a whole different conversation. But that does come intuitive with having that alternative mindset. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay. And so on the path of starting to wrap this up a little bit, in terms of the alt community and your experiences with it, what do you like? What do you want to see change? And what are some ways you think you could change it?
So
Or we could change it?
personally, personally, I feel like we need to start giving more people of color credit. Like, even without this alternative mindset, again, using TikTok, a very, very diverse platform, there's a movement going on in there actually that a lot of Black dance creators are stopping. They're just they're just letting everyone else figure out how to do a dance themselves, and they look terrible. So it's like, and that movement came from not giving these Black dancers credit for what they did. They time to go on finding their ring light, setting up, doing a dance that's very trendy, easy for these people to learn, to create that trend. And so alternative, as it became a trend now and mainstream now, it's like, you guys, like, people, they always overshadow people on TikTok. And that's where mainly alternative people are on TikTok. They're there on TikTok. So it's like, when, say, if something happens like with an alternative artist and um they said something anti-Black, a Black person would call it out, and then a white person would be like, I'm not going to amplify your voice. I'm going to say it and have a bigger audience and ruin it completely. So, like, it's sad that they just think they're being so progressive, but they're not doing shit. Like, at all. Like, they're not
Right.
doing any benefit to that. And I was like, if you want to talk about the issues, the racism in the alt community, which it started to not be anti-racist, it's crazy to me. Like, it's sad that we have to see that we have to talk about racism in our own community when it never started. Our community never really was racist. It
Yeah.
became
It's
racist with these neo-Nazis and people who wanted to say they're punk and skinhead, but they weren't. They blatantly weren't. They were the new KKK in a sense. So
yeah.
neo-Nazism and a lot of these different movements that battle against the original alt ideology is sad, but you still see it today. Like, it's very prominent because people don't care to amplify Black voices or amplify indigenous voices. That's a whole different thing. Like,
Right.
it is like, I want to be able to change that. Like, we need to, like, not to say that we need to put these people on the stature, but we need to, because that's how things are going to get across. Sure, like, with the Black Lives Matter movement, sure, it's good to have white people to voice your thing, but they're going to get all the credit. You're not.
Right. Exactly. And so it's a lot about seeing as that the alt community started out of love, love for one another and love of oneself, particularly. It's important to kind of, despite the intense individuality that the alt community promotes, it's important to remember that it didn't start with one person.
Right.
It was a group effort. It is a group effort and always will be a group effort. And if the alt community is going to continue to be alt, it needs to think about it needs to think a lot about its decisions that it's making online. Of course, I'm starting to personify the alt community, but by that I mean kind of thinking about instead of having good intentions and bad execution, we need good intentions and excellent execution.
Right.
Um, and that's going to take some time, but I would say that it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I for sure think it's possible to do it. It may take a while. It will be a process. Like we're already fighting our own battles as POC people with indigenous people and with black people. Like currently with the indigenous community, they're finding these unmarked graves in these residential schools and there's no one talking about it. Like it's a small group of people talking about it. And it's sad that when it is brought up to the light, it's a non-indigenous person. Or when it comes to a black issue, there's a white piece person behind it. Like it's sad that we can't speak for ourselves and get that same energy. You know, it's all terms of energy and how people perceive each other. Like, and it goes down with a lot of like issues within each other's communities. Like colorism is a big part of the black community, and you are more well spoken if you're light skinned, if you have a nice body. But if you're a dark skinned woman, oh, like if you have a hierarchy, if you are black, a woman, and a part of the LGBT community, you are at the bottom, and you don't get no type of voice, not one. You don't get to say how you feel because the fact that if you're the light skinned girls are taking over, but the light skinned people are able to voice that more because they appeal more to white people, they appeal more to people who are light. So with that, it's like you gotta realize that we have to amplify these voices down here to enable to have any real change, and that is happening. Like I've seen it happen. Like it's just going to take a while.
Yeah,
Like it really is.
it's about amplifying and it's about empathy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is about all that we have time for today. Thank you again so much for deciding to sit down and talking to me about this for a bit.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was a pleasure. I've been always wanted to be able to talk about to someone about this because I've had my concerns. I've seen it over TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, social media, period. And like, I want people to understand that being old comes from something. It's just not something you see on the internet. You turn into it the next day. So,
And so, thank you, the audience, for tuning in today. As always, I'm your host, DP from the QT. I'll see you later.